I want to ask you, how will you decide, for you personally, if 2025 has been a successful year? How will we, as a church family, as FMBC, decide if 2025 has been a successful year for us? In our modern society, it has become normal to measure your life. If you work in a modern job, you'll have KPIs, key performance indicators, which you are judged against, measured against, and oftentimes that spills over into the rest of our lives, where we're always comparing and measuring our lives and rating ourselves against others. Now, while this is quite acceptable in our daily lives, the problem is that often it creeps over into our spiritual life. And if we're going to be a people that measure our lives, and we're going to be a church family that measures our lives, and I'm talking in a spiritual sense here, then it ought not to be against other people, but it ought to be against Jesus. If we're going to be a people that judge our lives, then we need to let Jesus be the standard that we measure our life against. Our challenge is not to measure our success by the contents of our lives, but rather by the character of our hearts. Our hearts ought to be characterized with things like compassion, obedience, patience, and teachability. If we become a church family whose hearts are characterized by these traits, we will succeed in growing a healthy, vibrant church. But more than that, we'll be a church family that has a healthy, vibrant relationship with Jesus and one another. So church growth then becomes a natural byproduct of a healthy church. As we, as the members of FMBC, work on our character, the church becomes healthier and the church will grow. This morning I want us to look at a church growth strategy. And I've labelled it as J.O.Y, and you'll see what that means in a minute. Most of you probably already figured out what it means, and we'll get to that in just a tick. But I want to do something different. Usually I'll start and I'll slowly unwind and reveal where the sermon series is going. Today I'm just going to get it right on out there, right at the start. And the sermon series that follows afterwards will back up each of these points. So there's going to be no guessing. What I want us to do is obviously focus on church growth. But I want to do it from a strategy of developing a healthy membership to develop a healthy church, which naturally leads to a growing church. When I say I want to see the church grow, I don't want us to be focused on increasing our numbers, but rather focusing on increasing our character. To help you do this, we've got a little acronym, J.O.Y. Jesus, others, and you. If church growth is the natural result of church health, then the church needs to focus on Jesus, others, and you to be healthy. Each of the tenets must be in balance with each of the others in order for health to occur. And this is important because we're not perfect, and we tend to focus on those things or overemphasize the parts of joy that we feel most passionate about. And that's when imbalance happens. As we begin to plan, as we begin to focus, as we begin to settle our hearts on what God will have us do in 2025, let us intentionally set up a strategy and a structure to force ourselves to give equal attention to the tenets of J.O.Y. Jesus, others, and you. I believe that healthy churches are built on purpose. By focusing equally on Jesus, others, and you, by focusing on J.O.Y. and its tenets equally, our church will develop a healthy balance that makes lasting growth possible. If you're not already there, please turn with me to Matthew chapter number 22. Matthew 22 says this, beginning in verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they gathered themselves together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to them, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depends the whole law and the prophets. Now, during his ministry here on earth, Jesus was asked many questions. Now, some of those questions were asked by people that truly wanted to understand the truth. They didn't understand, and so they asked questions because they wanted to understand. But there were others that asked him questions in an attempt to trip him up, to get him to say something that they could use to accuse him, to use against him. Now, Matthew 22 records one of the latter exchanges where the religious leaders were trying to entangle Jesus with his speech. They wanted to trick Jesus. They wanted him to say something wrong so they could discredit him before the people. They were jealous, and they were jealous of the popularity that Jesus had garnered with the people. Now, regardless of why the question was asked, what is important is how Jesus answered it. When Jesus was asked which was the greatest commandment, he summarized it as love God and love others. This is commonly called the Great Commandment or the Golden Rule, and it forms the basis of our church motto, loving God, loving people. The sad thing is that over familiarity with this passage of Scripture has caused us to glaze over these verses. And this is a tragedy because we miss so much depth and teaching here. I asked you this morning, how will you measure our lives? How will you measure success in 2025? And here Jesus gives us the answer. How will I measure the success of my life in 2025? By whom and how I love. Or to put that in Jesus' words, by how we love God, how we love others, and how we love ourselves. Now I know what you're thinking. I've just added a third group. There's only two groups, loving God, loving others. Where'd the third group come from? Well, notice verse 39. Jesus says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. In this verse, Jesus tells us that when it comes to our love for one another, when it comes to the love of our neighbors, we are to do it to the same degree that we love ourselves. So we're to love others and we're to love ourselves. That's where the third group comes from. And Jesus' command for us to love our neighbors as ourselves is a radical teaching with far-reaching implications. The only way to describe this command, to love your neighbor as yourself, is radical. But what do I mean by radical, and why do I use that word? In answering the question that was posed to him by this lawyer, Jesus teaches us both the problem and the cure. This shows Jesus as the master teacher. He lays out the problem and he lays out the cure in one sentence. The problem is love your neighbor as yourself. The cure is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is what makes Jesus' answer so radical. Let's start with the problem and work our way to the cure, and better understand that we're to measure our lives by whom and how we love. The great commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. But in this command lies our greatest problem. Through this command, we come face to face with the reality of our inability to do it, but also our unwillingness to obey it. In answering the religious leaders, Jesus reveals to us the corruption, the failure, and the sinfulness of our hearts. How will you measure your success this year? by whom and how you love. Or as Jesus commanded, by how you will love others. The problem is this command goes against every fibre of our being. This command to love others is contrary to our nature. This command to love one another, to love others, requires us to place our priorities and our needs to one side and to prioritize the needs of someone else. The command to love others exposes the sinfulness of our hearts. See, our heart's desire is on our own happiness and our own needs. We focus and we prioritize the things that bring us comfort and fulfillment. Our communities are full of people who are seeking their own comfort. Churches are filled with people seeking their own happiness. But Jesus tells us, Jesus commands us to consider the happiness and comfort of others first. When my happiness is the focus, when my happiness is the priority, I become controlling and I find it difficult to compromise because it's about me and mine and what I want. I want things to go my way. I want things to be done my way because that is what will make me happy. Not doing it your way. I was going to make a joke about my wife, but she's not here, so I won't do it. I find that giving and sharing does not come easy. I place others' needs secondary to mine. If I can do it, and it doesn't affect my happiness or my comfort, then I'll do it. But if it does, I'll look for some compromise or other way of doing it. When my happiness is the most important thing, I will take constructive criticism as a personal attack. When my comfort and my success and is what's most important, I become moody and withdrawn when others have the spotlight. I find forgiving others difficult. You see, the command of Jesus gets to the heart of the problem. That is our sinfulness, which is selfishness. Selfishness is all about focusing all of our attention and resources on meeting our needs for happiness at the expense of others. Selfishness is about depending upon our own strength and resources to find happiness, rather than having to depend on God. Selfishness is the pursuit of happiness anywhere but in the glory of God and the good of others. Selfishness is at the heart of our sin, and Jesus exposes that sin when he says, you want to know what the greatest commandment is? Love your neighbor as yourself. But the master teacher here wants to take our selfishness and turn it on its head. He wants to take our selfish love and turn it on its head so that it can be used in a positive way to bring glory to God and good to others. And I find that rather intriguing. And if we're going to do that, if we're going to take our selfish love and turn it around to bring glory to God and good to others, then the first thing we need to do is we need to acknowledge that self-love is a creation of God. Our love of self is a creation of God. It's a given. The problem is that in our humanness, in our sinfulness, our self-love has been marred by sin and has become selfishness. All of you have a powerful instinct for self-love. All of you want to be happy, fulfilled, and satisfied, and there's nothing wrong with that. You want to eat good food. You want fashionable clothes. You want a nice place to live. You want protection from violence. You want meaningful and pleasant activities to fill your day. You want friends to like you and spend time with you. And you want your life to count for something. All this self-love is simply the deep longing to diminish pain and increase happiness. And that's where Jesus starts. With your inborn human nature, your love for yourself. The part that moves you to do what you will do. Jesus says, I'm going to start with your self-love because it's common to all people. You don't have to learn it. It comes naturally. And in and of itself, it's a good thing. To want to be filled and not hungry is not evil. To want to be warm in the winter is not evil. To want to shower and use deodorant to smell nice is not evil. In some cases, it's a necessity. To want to be safe in a crisis is not evil, and want to be liked by others is not evil. So the first thing we need to understand is that God has created us with this capacity to self-love. Self-love is at the core, self-love at its core is a good thing. But through sin, it becomes something that God did not intend it to be. Our self-love will be exposed as sin or selfishness by the way we respond to Jesus' commandment to love our neighbour as ourselves. Second thing is that Jesus' command is to love your neighbour as you love yourself. What Jesus has in mind is, as you long for food when you're hungry, so long to feed your neighbour when he is hungry. As you long for nice clothes for yourself, so long for nice clothes for your neighbour. As you work for a comfortable place to live, so desire a comfortable place for your neighbour to live. As you seek safety and security from calamity and violence, so seek comfort and security for your neighbour. As you seek friends for yourself, so be a friend to your neighbour. In other words, make your self-seeking the measure of your self-giving. That's how Jesus turns it on our heads. Make your self-seeking the measure of your self-giving. Take your selfishness and turn it into selflessness. When Jesus says, love your neighbour as yourself, the word as is a radical word. It's a big word. It means if you are energetic in pursuing your own happiness, be energetic in pursuing the happiness of your neighbour. If you're creative in pursuing your own happiness, be creative in pursuing the happiness of your neighbour. If you're persevering in your pursuing of your own happiness, be persevering in pursuing the happiness of your neighbour. In other words, Jesus is not just saying seek for your neighbour the same things that you seek for yourself, but seek them in the same way. Take the same zeal, the same energy, the same creativity, the same perseverance that you have for your own happiness, for your own well-being, and channel that into the seeking the happiness and well-being of others. Turn your own self-seeking into self-giving. Make the degree you pursue your own happiness the degree to which you pursue the happiness of others. And if you think about it, if we all do that, what a difference that would make in our relationships. Ask yourself the question, how do I pursue my own well-being? And let that be the level to which you strive to pursue your neighbour's well-being. Because that's the degree, that's the standard, and that's the level to which we are to love our neighbours as ourselves. Now here's the thing. We find this command not only threatening, but overwhelming. We feel if we take Jesus seriously, we will not just have to love others as we love ourselves, but we will have to love them instead of ourselves. And we fear that if we follow Jesus in this way, if we really devote ourselves to pursuing the happiness of others, that our own desires for happiness will always be preempted. That our neighbour's claim on my time and energy and creativity will always take priority. So the command to love my neighbour as I love myself really feels like a threat to my own well-being. How is this even possible? And you know what? I think Jesus did this on purpose. I think he wanted us to feel this way. That's where the necessity of the first commandment is needed to fulfill the second. I think Jesus was cognizant of the problem. You know, he knows our hearts. You know, he knows the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so Jesus offered us the cure to the problem. He wants us to realize that this is why the first commandment is the first commandment. You see, it's the first commandment that makes the second commandment doable. The first commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. The first commandment is the basis of the second commandment. The second commandment is a visible expression of the first commandment. How do people know if I love God? With all my heart and with all my soul and with all my mind. They'll see it through the way I love my neighbour as myself. So when Jesus offers the first commandment, this means that before we make our own self-seeking the measure of our self-giving, that we're to make God the focus of your self-seeking. Okay? And I know that sounds blah, blah. Well, let's break it down. Love God with all your heart means find in God a satisfaction so profound that it fills up your heart. Love God with all your soul means find in God a meaning so rich and so deep that it fills up all the aching corners of your soul. Love the Lord your God with all your mind means find in God the riches of knowledge, insight, and wisdom that guide and satisfy all the human mind was meant to be. In other words, take all your self-love, all your longing for joy, hope, love, security, fulfillment, and significance. Take all of that and focus it in on God until He satisfies your heart and your soul and your mind. What you find is that it is not a cancelling out of self-love, but a fulfillment and a transformation of self-love. God says, come to me and I will give you fullness of joy. I will satisfy your heart and soul and mind with my glory. That is the first commandment. And with that great discovery that God is the never-ending source of our joy, the way we love others is forever changed. Now, when Jesus says, love your neighbour as yourself, we don't respond by saying, I feel overwhelmed by this command to love others as myself. I don't feel that my love for myself is made impossible by all the needs of my neighbours. Instead, we say, I love myself and I want to be happy. I long for joy, satisfaction, fulfillment, significance, and security. God has called me, has commanded me to come to Him first for all these things. He commands that my love for Him be the form of my love for me. that all my longings for me I find in Him. And that is what our self-love is to become. My love for God and my love for myself have become one. My quest for happiness is now nothing other than a quest for God. So what is Jesus commanding? When he gives us the command in the second commandment to love our neighbours as ourselves, He is commanding that our self-love, which has now discovered its fulfillment in God love, be the measure and content of our neighbour love. Or put it another way, He is commanding that our inborn self-seeking, which has now been transposed into God-seeking, overflows and extends itself to loving our neighbour. And if you still don't get it, think of it like this, because I'm simple and this is how I think about it. God is like a water tap, and we are a soak hose. When you connect the soak hose to the water tap and turn the tap on, the water flows through the hose, but it also flows out of the hose. So we are to tap into the source of water, God, God's love, God's fulfillment, God's joy, so that it can flow in us and through us, but like a soak hose, flow out of us. Loving our neighbour as ourselves. So we are to tap into God for our happiness and fulfillment and allow that to flow through us, but also out of us so that others can experience the happiness and the fulfillment that we have found. So if you are longing to see more of God's bounty through the supplier of your needs, then seek to show others the greatness of this divine bounty you have found in Him by your generosity towards them. As God blesses you, that ought to overflow and flow out of us so that we bless others. As we enjoy more of God's compassion, as we approach God and we find consolation in our sorrow, that ought to flow in us and through us and out of us. And we ought to show compassion to those around us, to our neighbours. We ought to be there to console our neighbours when they are going through times of sorrow. In all these ways, neighbour love does not threaten self-love, because self-love has become God love. And God love is not threatened, diminished, or exhausted by being poured out into the lives of others. Now, I don't mean that this answers all the questions about love, or that it takes away every kind of threat in loving our neighbour. There are many perplexities in the life of love. There are competing claims on our limited time. There are hard choices about what to give up and what to keep. There are different interpretations of what is good for another person, what's good for one person and what's good for another person. And I don't mean that this makes it all simple. What I do mean is that loving God sustains us through all the joy, the pain, the perplexity, and the uncertainty of what loving our neighbours should be. Remember, when the sacrifice is great, then the grace is sufficient. When the fork in the road of love is unmarked, we remember the joy and the love that His grace, remember with joy and love that His grace is sufficient. When we are distracted by the world and our hearts give way to seasons of selfishness, and we find ourselves off the path of love, we remember that God alone can satisfy. And we repent and love His all-sufficient grace all the more. Loving God, loving others is a radical command. It gets to the heart of our sin, which is selfishness. In the first commandment, He focused the passion to be happy firmly on God and God alone. In the second commandment, He opens a whole wide world of expanding joy in God as we love others. People, wherever you find them, neighbours, wherever you find them, are designed to receive and enlarge your joy in God. Love them the way you love yourself. Show them, give them through every practical means available what you have found for yourself in Christ Jesus. How will you measure success in your life in 2025? Hopefully, by the way Jesus defines success, by whom and how we love. Thank you this morning.